Somewhere right now, a man is standing in a jewelry store with his hands sweating. He is about to spend 2 months of his income on a small piece of carbon. He has been told, by everyone and by no one in particular, that this is what a serious man does. That if he spends less, the woman he loves will notice. That the size of this stone is a public statement about the size of his commitment. He believes he is participating in a tradition. He is participating in an advertising campaign that started in 1938. Here is what he does not know. Diamonds are not rare. They are one of the most common gemstones on Earth, and there is enough supply sitting in vaults right now to crash the price overnight. They do not hold value. Walk out of that store, try to sell the ring back a week later, and you will be offered a fraction of what you paid. And the tradition he is honoring is younger than the microwave oven. Before 1938, only about 1 American engagement ring in 10 had a diamond in it. Most women who got a ring at all got a sapphire, a ruby, an emerald, or a plain gold band. Stones with actual color, actual distinction. A clear rock was for the very rich, and ordinary people did not think about it. 50 years later, 4 out of 5 American brides had one. So who changed that? A single company with a warehouse problem, too many diamonds and not enough desire, hired an advertising agency in Philadelphia and asked it, in writing, about the use of propaganda to move stones in America. We're going to follow a 15-year-old boy who picked up a pebble on a riverbank and whose family got nothing from what followed. We're going to watch a sickly English vicar's son take over an entire industry and watch the music hall entertainer who fought him for it go over the side of a ship in the Atlantic. We're going to read the 4 words a tired copywriter scribbled on a notepad at midnight. 4 words that made a whole civilization stop reselling their jewelry. And we're going to see the machine, after 90 years, finally start to break. Because this isn't really a story about gemstones. It's about how you manufacture a feeling, sell it to 2 continents, and charge people 2 months of their life for it. Let's open the vault. In 1867, a 15-year-old named Erasmus Jacobs was walking on his father's land along the Orange River near a settlement called Hopetown in what is now South Africa. He picked up a stone. It was heavier than it looked, and it took the light strangely. He brought it home, and it sat around the farmhouse the way any pebble a boy brings home sits around a farmhouse. A neighbor noticed it. The neighbor passed it to a geologist, who confirmed what nobody in that house had suspected. It was a diamond of 21¼ carats. It was named the Eureka, and the governor of the Cape Colony bought it for £500. Hold on to the Jacobs family for a second, because it tells you everything about the century that followed. The stone that started an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars came off their farm, out of their son's pocket. The record of what they actually received for it is thin and disputed. Some payment reached the father, from someone, in some amount nobody can now establish. What is certain is that the fortune the Eureka opened up went overwhelmingly to other people. 2 years later, a shepherd found a much bigger one on the same river, 83½ carats, sold to an English earl for £25,000. They called it the Star of South Africa. And that is when the world came. Farmers walked off their fields. Shopkeepers locked their doors. Men from England, Germany, Australia sold what they owned and got on ships. By 1871, the digging had moved inland to a flat-topped hill on a farm belonging to 2 brothers named De Beers, a name the brothers would sell out of and never profit from, but which would end up on the most powerful company in the history of luxury. Within 2 months, 30,000 people were living around that hill. A town appeared out of nothing. What they dug became known as the Big Hole, and the numbers are difficult to hold in your head. By the time work stopped in 1914, men with picks and shovels had taken 22.5 million tons of earth out of the ground by hand. At peak, 50,000 men were in that pit. There was no safety regulation of any kind. Men died of rockfalls, of heat, of disease, of the collapse of undercut walls. Nobody was counting carefully, which itself tells you what those lives were worth to the operation. And out of all that earth came about 2,700 kilograms of diamonds, which is the first thing you need to understand about this entire story. The ground was full of them. It is worth sitting with the arithmetic of that pit for a second. 22 million tons, moved by men with hand tools, in heat, in a hole that got deeper and more unstable every month they worked it. And what came out of all that labor would fit, if you piled it up, into the back of a small van. The value was never in the difficulty of getting them out. Getting them out was easy enough that 30,000 people did it with shovels. The value would have to be manufactured somewhere else entirely. Into that chaos, in 1872, came a 19-year-old Englishman with weak lungs. Cecil John Rhodes was the fifth son of a vicar, sent to South Africa because his family hoped the climate would keep him alive. He was supposed to help his brother grow cotton. He looked at the diamond fields instead, and he saw something that thousands of men digging in that pit did not. They saw diamonds. He saw a system. The digging at Kimberley was a shambles. Thousands of separate claim holders were working plots the size of a room right against each other. As they went deeper, the walls between claims collapsed, pits flooded, and extraction became dangerous and absurd. Rhodes started by buying flooded claims that other men had given up on, pumping them out, and selling them at a profit. Then he stopped selling and started keeping. In 1880, he formed the De Beers Mining Company, named for the farm. But there was another man doing the same thing from the other direction, and he is the part of this story that usually gets cut. Barney Barnato was born Barnett Isaacs in the East End of London. He had been a music hall entertainer, a comic, a boxer, a man who worked crowds for coins. He arrived in South Africa with essentially nothing and built a diamond fortune out of nerve, patter, and an instinct for a deal that nobody could teach. For years, he and Rhodes circled each other, buying claims, blocking each other, driving each other's share prices. Rhodes had one thing Barnato did not: the money of the world behind him. Alfred Beit financed him. So critically did the London banking house of Rothschild. In July of 1887, Rhodes bought out the major French interest in the mines. Then he turned on Barnato, drove up the share price of Barnato's company until absorbing it became inevitable, and forced the merger. On the 12th of March, 1888, De Beers Consolidated Mines came into existence with Rhodes as chairman. The deal was closed with what was reported at the time as the largest check ever written, over £5 million. By 1891, De Beers controlled roughly 90% of the world's diamond production. Barnato stayed rich and stayed on the board, and something in him did not survive the loss. Through the 1890s, his health and his mind deteriorated. By 1897, he was being watched constantly by people who were worried about him. In June of that year, he was aboard a ship off Madeira. He turned to the man sitting with him and asked what time it was. Then he pulled his arm free and went over the side. He was 44. The coroner recorded drowning while temporarily insane. His family never accepted it, and Rhodes, who won, was dead 5 years later at 48. He left his fortune to found a scholarship, and it still sends students to Oxford today, which means that money dug out of that pit by hand, by men nobody counted, is quietly paying tuition in England this term. But here is the insight that outlived both of them, and it is the engine of everything that comes next. Rhodes was not consolidating the mines for efficiency. He was consolidating them to control supply, because he understood the thing the individual diggers never did. Diamonds were never scarce. The mines were producing an enormous, frightening quantity of stones, and if all of them reached the market, the price would collapse to what the material is actually worth, which is very little. The only way to keep a diamond expensive was to make sure most diamonds never reached anyone. So he built the London Diamond Syndicate, a distribution channel that decided exactly how many stones would be released, to whom, and at what price. Scarcity was not discovered. It was administered. After Rhodes died, the machine started to slip. New deposits turned up near Pretoria in 1902 and on the coast of German Southwest Africa in 1908, outside De Beers' control. By 1914, the company's share of world production had fallen to about 40%. Then came Ernest Oppenheimer. Born in Germany in 1880, he arrived in South Africa at 22 as a buyer for a London firm, and he understood the trade at the level of its bones. In 1917, backed by the American financier J.P. Morgan, he founded the Anglo-American Corporation. Through the 1920s, he took the Southwest African mines, built a rival syndicate, bought a seat on the De Beers board in 1926, and became chairman in 1929. And then he did what Rhodes had only started. Oppenheimer's insight was that controlling the mines was not enough. You had to control the entire pipe, from the rock coming out of the ground to the ring going onto a finger. He built the central selling organization, and almost every rough diamond on Earth went through it. The way it worked is worth describing exactly because people assume a market where there wasn't one. A small number of approved dealers, site holders, were invited to London a handful of times a year. Each was handed a sealed box of rough stones, sorted by De Beers, priced by De Beers. You could buy the box at that price, or you could decline. You could not negotiate. You could not ask for different stones. You could not complain about the contents. Do any of those things, and you were not invited back, which meant losing access to the world's supply of the product your entire business sold. And if a producer outside the system tried to sell independently, Oppenheimer had an answer of beautiful simplicity. Flood the market with the same kind of stone until the price collapsed and the independent went broke. Then buy them and fold their production into the pipe. Notice what that threat actually rests on. To crash a market on purpose, you need a stockpile. You need vaults full of the thing you have spent decades telling the world is rare. De Beers had them. The company's real product was never the diamonds it sold. It was the diamonds it refused to sell. By the 1930s, De Beers controlled something like 80% of the world's diamond trade, and it had a problem that all of that power could not solve, because here is the thing the industry could not admit out loud. People did not want diamonds very much. The Depression had flattened the market. At the worst of it, De Beers had closed its mines entirely, and even as the economy came back in the late 30s, diamonds sat there. Poverty was only half of it. The deeper problem was that a diamond meant nothing to an ordinary person. It was a rich man's object, something a duchess owned, not something a machinist in Ohio would think to buy for the woman he was marrying. Engagement rings existed. The custom of a ring at betrothal goes back to Rome, but a ring did not imply a diamond. In America in the 1930s, about one engagement ring in 10 had one. A sapphire was just as likely, so was a plain band and nothing else, and women, by and large, were not asking for one. In hard times, a large clear stone looked like exactly what it was. Money that could have been a washing machine, a car, furniture for a first home, set on fire for decoration. So Ernest Oppenheimer sat on top of the most complete monopoly in the world over a product that nobody had any particular reason to buy. In 1938, a representative of Oppenheimer wrote to N.W. Ayer & Son, one of the oldest advertising agencies in America, in Philadelphia. The letter asked about, and this is the actual language of the correspondence, the use of propaganda in various forms to increase the sale of diamonds in the United States. Harry Oppenheimer, Ernest's son, went to New York to meet the agency himself, and the problem he laid on the table was, by any professional standard, impossible. They could not advertise a product because De Beers sold rough stones, not rings. There was no item to photograph. They could not take market share because there were no competitors worth the name. They already had the market, and the thing itself had no features to sell. It is a clear rock. It sparkles, and so do cheaper stones, several of which are more visually interesting. No product, no competitor, no feature, no demand, in the tail of a depression. What N.W. Ayer built out of that is, without much argument, the most effective advertising campaign ever run. Their strategy was one sentence long, and it changed the century. They would sell an idea rather than a stone and weld the diamond to it permanently, that a diamond is what love looks like when it becomes permanent. And the way they did it is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, because it does not look like advertising at all. They almost never ran a hard sell ad. Instead, they planted stories in newspapers and magazines about the meaning of the diamond ring. They fed fashion editors material, so diamonds appeared in editorial spreads next to society weddings. They made sure film stars were photographed wearing diamonds at premieres, and then told the press where to look. They supplied stones to studios as props, so that when a man proposed on screen, and men proposed on screen constantly, there was a diamond in the box. And they sent lecturers into American high schools to talk to teenage girls about the tradition of the diamond engagement ring, not to sell them anything, to install an expectation in women who would not be marrying for another 5 or 6 years. That is the whole method in one image. A company planting a memory of a tradition in children who would later be certain they had always known it. And they went upmarket in a way nobody else was doing. De Beers commissioned original work from Picasso, from Salvador Dali, from Raoul Dufy, and ran it in the advertisements. Think about the move. Instead of showing you a ring and a price, they put you in front of a Picasso and let you conclude that this object belongs in that category. Rare, made once, beyond ordinary judgment about cost. None of it read as selling. It read as culture, as something that had simply always been true as far back as anyone could be bothered to check. In fact, it was being written in real time in an office in Philadelphia for a mining company in Africa. The numbers moved fast. Between 1938 and 1941, 4 years, diamond sales in the United States rose by more than half. That was the warm-up. In 1947, a copywriter at the agency named Frances Garrity was working late on the De Beers account and getting nowhere. She was tired, she wanted to go to bed, and she scribbled a line at the bottom of a page. "A diamond is forever." She brought it in the next morning. Nobody in the room was excited. She herself said later that she thought it was just okay. Advertising Age would eventually call it the greatest advertising slogan of the 20th century. And here is the detail I cannot get out of my head. Frances Garrity wrote the diamond advertising for De Beers for the next 25 years. Every campaign, every line that taught American men what love was supposed to cost. She never married. The woman who convinced a civilization that an engagement is incomplete without a diamond spent her working life writing that message for other people and lived outside of it herself. Look at what those 4 words actually do, because they are working on 2 levels and only one of them is romantic. On the surface, your marriage is permanent, and here is a permanent object to represent it. Lovely. Underneath, if a diamond is forever, you never sell it. And that is the load-bearing wall of the entire industry, because if nobody resells, there is no second-hand market, and if there is no second-hand market, no ordinary buyer ever discovers the second thing De Beers could not afford for you to know. A diamond loses most of its value the moment you leave the store. Not some. Most. When a magazine tested this by buying a stone and reselling it a week later, the offer came back 62% below what they had paid. 7 days. A journalist who ran the same experiment got a fraction of his money. In one documented theft, the thief was able to get $200 for stones insured at $50,000. The retail price of a diamond is not a market price. It is a number, the seller says out loud, sustained by the fact that almost nobody ever tests it. 4 words, written at midnight by an exhausted woman who thought they were fine, kept 100 million people from testing it. And then the campaign did one more thing, which was to put a number on your love. In the 30s and 40s, De Beers began promoting the idea that a man should spend 1 month's salary on the ring. Look at the design of that. Not a price, a percentage. It scales. A school teacher and a banker are both covered by the same rule, and both can fail it. By the 80s, the number had quietly doubled. 2 months. One advertisement of the period showed a newly engaged woman with her ring and the line, "2 months' salary showed the future Mrs. Smith what the future would be like." Read that again, because it is a threat dressed as romance. Spend less, and she will draw conclusions about the life you are offering her. That is not selling a product. That is installing a test a man can fail in front of the person he loves, and then selling him the answer. The results are almost hard to believe. In 1939, wholesale diamond sales in the United States were about $23 million a year on an advertising budget of roughly $200,000. By 1979, wholesale sales were over $2 billion. In 1940, one first-time American bride in 10 got a diamond. By 1990, it was 4 in 5. One generation, one agency, one rewritten instinct. And then they proved it could be done to a culture with no connection to any of it whatsoever. Until 1959, diamonds could not legally be imported into Japan. Japanese marriage custom ran on centuries of Shinto practice. Families, intermediaries, a ceremony sealed by the couple drinking rice wine from the same cup. There was no tradition of romantic courtship in the Western sense, and no tradition at all of giving jewelry to mark a betrothal. Not a weak tradition, none. Even a decade of American military presence after the war had produced no meaningful appetite for diamonds. In 1967, De Beers went in through the agency J. Walter Thompson. At that point, 5% of Japanese brides received a diamond ring. The strategy was adapted with real intelligence. They did not try to graft the diamond onto Japanese tradition. That would have failed. They positioned it as the opposite of tradition. A diamond meant you were modern, Western-facing, part of the world that was arriving, not what your grandmother did, what your generation does. By 1981, 14 years, the figure had gone from 5% to 60. Sit with that number against the one from America. In the United States, it took roughly 50 years to move from one bride in 10 to 4 in 5, and that was a country the campaign had been running in continuously since before the war. In Japan, they did nearly the same thing in 14, in a culture with no precedent to build on at all. The second attempt was faster because by then they knew exactly what they were doing. The first campaign had been an experiment. The second was a method. Japan became the second largest diamond market on Earth, on top of nothing. On top of a custom that had never existed, that had no root in the religion, the history, or the family structure of the country. If you ever wondered whether culture can be manufactured wholesale by people who want to sell you something, that is your answer, and it took less than 15 years. Step back and look at the completed machine, because the elegance of it is genuinely remarkable and genuinely disturbing. Take a common material and make it scarce by owning the supply. Take a product with almost no resale value and protect the illusion by telling people it is immoral to resell. Take a culture with no tradition and write one for it. Attach a price rule that scales to any income in any country so nobody is ever off the hook. Then use the profits to buy more supply and more advertising and run the loop again. It held for the better part of a century. The cracks came from directions the company could not buy. Big new deposits in Canada, Australia, and Russia in the 90s, backed by governments and corporations with no interest in taking a sealed box at a fixed price. Then conflict diamonds, stones out of war zones in Sierra Leone and the Congo, funding people who cut the hands off civilians, and suddenly the most romantic object in the world was being discussed in the same paragraph as child soldiers. In 2004, De Beers pleaded guilty in the United States to a price-fixing charge and paid a fine. 4 years later, it paid nearly $300 million to settle class actions alleging price-fixing and misleading advertising. After decades of operating in violation of American antitrust law, the company formally settled its way back into the country whose desires it had rewritten. But the thing that is actually killing the spell is not a court. It's a machine that grows diamonds in a box. Lab-grown stones are diamonds. Not imitations, not substitutes. The same carbon lattice, the same hardness, the same sparkle, indistinguishable to a jeweler's loupe. And they cost a fraction. The technology has existed since the middle of the last century, but only in the 2010s did production scale enough to reach the jewelry counter. What happened next is the fastest collapse of a manufactured value I know of. In 2019, lab-grown stones were about 5% of diamond jewelry sales. They are now above a fifth of the market and climbing. And the price of a 1-carat lab-grown diamond has fallen roughly 76% since 2018. Think about what that number means. For 90 years, the industry insisted that the price of a diamond reflected something real: rarity, permanence, the weight of the Earth's own time. Then a competitor arrived selling the identical object with no story attached, and the price went into free fall, which tells you what you were paying for all along, not the stone. The story about the stone, and the industry knows it. Watch what the marketing has quietly become in the last few years. Not a word about rarity, because rarity is now indefensible, but a great deal about being natural, about the billion years in the earth, the geological romance, the idea that a stone grown in a machine is somehow counterfeit, even though it is chemically the same object. That is the same trick, run again, on a new generation. When scarcity stopped working, they reached for authenticity. The product stayed identical, only the story changed. So here's my question for you. That man in the jewelry store believes he is doing what men have always done. He is doing what an agency in Philadelphia decided men should do in 1938 to solve a warehouse problem in Africa. What else are we all doing right now because somebody with something to sell told us it was a tradition? Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if you own one, a ring, a stone, something in a box in a drawer, you don't have to sell it. Francis Garrity wasn't lying exactly. A diamond really is forever. That was always the point. Forever is how long you keep it, and never selling it is how the price stays where they put it. If you want more of these, the parts of ordinary life that turn out to have a start date, subscribe and open the vault with us. There's another one waiting for you right here.